Yes, hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Mario, and I present this part of the agenda together with Alex from Kanta. And Alex is actually, I have to say, the brain behind this operation. And the goal for this project was for us to run a proof of concept to see if we can use unstructured data, customer feedback we already have got in our own real estate to uncover the drivers of brand equity. British Gas is an organization in transformation. We moving from an energy supplier to a provider of home services. And that means we need to reposition the brand in the market. Coming from an energy category, which is very low involvement, so consumers spend on average just a few minutes a year communicating with a supplier, to moving into home services and providing these services that strike right at the heart of home life, means we need to gain the trust of consumers, but we also need to gain permission to operate in this space. And to aid this transition, we need to move beyond a functional relationship really with our customers. We need to understand the emotional landscape of home life and the services and the role we play within this. We, of course, measure many aspects of the customer experience already. We quantify these outcomes. We use customer satisfaction. We use recommendation scores and then aggregate them into Net Promoter Score, NPS. And like most organizations, we traditionally use numbers first. So, and we categorize everything into metrics, and then we use open-ended feedback to dig a bit deeper where we have to, if we need to explain movements of metrics, and we can't. But the reality is that open-ended feedback really holds a lot more than just just what we use it for. It's consumers speaking in their own language. It's consumers speaking about what's really important to them. And for us, decoding this language beyond the functional and your typical word counting is really key to this process. Understanding the underlying emotion and how we make people feel is what actually drives re-engagement with the brand. In reality, it's not necessarily just customer satisfaction or Net Promoter Score. And we need to elevate this understanding of emotions back beyond into business contexts. We've worked quite hard over the last couple of years to ensure that our brand tracking reflects as closely as possible what consumers really think and feel. We've reduced the survey from a 15+ minute juggernaut down to just 7 minutes, and really just to the core of measuring brand equity. And we've freed up a lot of resources through this, and we've used this to undertake strategic deep dives on a regular basis. So we've done things like intuitive response testing, where we actually found out that Britishness, even for us as an organization, wasn't as deeply seated held belief as we thought it might be. We've done things like metaphoric solicitation analysis to uncover what it really means to be the ideal home services provider, and uncover trust. And we've done a lot of this work, but we've considered for a while how we can use one of the biggest resources we have in our feedback estate at our disposal, and how we can use that to our best advantage. We receive about 300,000 pieces of open-ended feedback every year, so a huge amount, and it comes through our customer satisfaction survey. We survey 19 different customer journeys in energy and services. And a customer journey, just to make that clear, it could be something as small as a meter read. It could be a direct debit reassessment, or the begin journey with us when you actually buy energy from us. So something very small to something quite complicated. And in each of these journeys, we measure customer feedback, or we collect customer feedback, and we have these 300,000 pieces of open-ended feedback that we sit on. It's an enormous amount. Nobody can read through this as a person and really understand the totality of what we're seeing and what consumers are really telling us. So we approached Kanta and said, well, is there actually something we can do? Is there a tool out that can help us to analyze this unstructured data and derive the underlying emotions? And we weren't really able to benefit otherwise from this extremely rich data if we just look at, or what do people talk about on a functional level. In addition, as a very large organization, we also operate in silos. So the customer experience team doesn't necessarily liaise with the brand team or with the propositions team when they make any changes to the experience. And so we operate very separately from each other. If you let customers talk about their experience in their own words, they will actually talk about what really matters to them. They will use their own, obviously their own words, their own language, and from that you can decode with the help of the counter tool the underlying emotions in there. But they will also tell you how you perform in these areas that are really important to them. And being able to quantify this consumer feedback at an emotional level in a really meaningful way, and extracting the emotional territories out of this, translating them back into a business context, is the key of transforming the customer experience at British Gas. I can't just simply go to the board of directors and say, oh, we need to make customers feel happy about us, or we need to make customers feel that we are empathetic, as we've seen with the previous speaker. We need to translate these emotions back into a business context, into tangible customer experiences, back into what board members really understand. And Alex is going to talk to you now how we did that, or how the Kantar team did this.
Thanks, Mario. So I guess how we do this really starts from data, and I think data fusion has been a big kind of concept that's been brought up today. So I'll start just highlighting the data sources that we use. So as Mario mentioned, we have 300,000 responses yearly. We took 2 years worth of data, giving us about 600,000 in total. And we then supplemented that with social data. So these are social media platforms, but also forums and review sites all around home services and energy. We also included, at a very interesting and unique data source, the total social panel data. And this represents word of mouth, both online and offline, most importantly offline, about a sort of series of brands. And the target of this, because any kind of data-led exercise needs sort of quantitative targets, were 2 surveys, one on NPS and the second on brand consideration. So we have those scores moving over the 2 years. We took a 2-stage approach to really kind of dig through and understand what was driving each of these sort of KPIs we were looking at. The first is a more traditional category landscape, and this is a kind of static snapshot in time, and it's human-led, AI-assisted, or you can see the air quotes now. And this is really here to identify what are the key consumer motivations, what kind of solutions, products, brands, and I think especially in the context of emotions, what moments are important to them. And it's also kind of allows a little bit of white space innovation, looking at areas covered by British Gas and areas covered by other brands. And the second stage was a predictive equity model. And this is a temporal model, and it's much more data-led, with the human, the analyst, coming at the final stages of it to provide that human intuition and sort of comprehensive understanding. What's nice about using a data-led approach is it allows for simulation on top of this, so you can anticipate what certain strategic decisions might have, or what impact those might have on your measures. It's really to allow a quantitative attribution of how important each of your measures are, which really helps with prioritization. And really you're looking here to understand the main and the biggest contributors to NPS and brand. So the key emotions people are feeling, how they're impacting these scores. So we're going to now go through each of these 2 stages in a bit more detail. And Mario's going to kind of sandwich those descriptions, because it gets a bit dense and technical in parts, with the more interesting insights that we derived from them. So at Kantar, our category landscape is powered by a toolbox we call Stan, which is an AI toolkit that's a sort of 4-step process to provide analysts with a dashboard they can use for deriving these useful information. The process starts with, as already has been mentioned before, a bit of a plumbing job of unifying all of the data pipelines into a kind of single contiguous data set. From there, we then enrich the data using some sentiment detection, and we use a kind of standard sort of state-of-the-art transformer architecture. And what's kind of important here, particularly when you're working within different kind of categories, different verticals, you have to kind of fine-tune these models on your specific data set that you're using. So for utilities data, I think the best examples we found were typically words like smart and energy are associated with very positive emotions. Obviously, in this context, they refer to smart meters and energy bills. So they're much more functional here. And it's important that your model understands this. We then structure the data using a taxonomy. And we use a hierarchical taxonomy, which is allowing us to kind of look at top level insights, but also drill down into detail and isolate very specific verbatims if we want to go all the way to the consumer responses. The next stage is then transforming. And here we're aggregating the data and putting some basic models on the top of it, which is then presented, visualized in the dashboard for the analyst. And the analyst here will use a variety of kind of measures, metrics, typically velocity, sort of growth trajectories, growth velocities, volumes to identify the kind of key points. And they'll also kind of then be able to look at how these key lenses, key parts of the taxonomy interact with other parts of the taxonomy. And I think it's important here to mention that the taxonomy we built wasn't kind of purely functional. It wasn't just an ontology like traditional taxonomies, but it had a big focus on including emotional lenses to capture things like peace of mind, sort of stress, worry, concern, and also kind of drivers or moments that are emotionally charged, such as vulnerability, moving life stages, you know, welcoming in a new child, moving house, these stages that are kind of going to be associated with your emotions. And we're allowed to then cross the kind of key parts of the taxonomy with these using methods like correspondence analysis and indexes. So I'll hand over to Mario to talk about some of what we've learned from this methodology.
Thanks, Alex. As Alex has just mentioned, we used 2 distinct data sets for this, and each of this data set had its own very specific task. So we used social media data, social feedback, to tell us about the what of the category. So the underlying needs, the motivations to engage in an energy and home services context. And we found 3 key themes that drive emotions in this setting. The first one is about security, and it's about the safety and security of your home. It's about peace of mind, which sort of like underpins everything in the home services sector. People live incredibly busy lives, and anything breaking in your home, anything not working as it's supposed to, provides for a huge amount of disruption in people's lives. The second theme that came out is around sustainability. Sustainability is not necessarily a word consumers use very often, but what they talk about in this context is very much about energy efficiency, about using smart meters to monitor your energy usage, to understand where you're potentially using too much energy, where you're wasting energy. Anecdotally, we know it causes a lot of stress in households when people argue about who's wasting energy by boiling a full kettle or letting the shower run for too long. But ultimately, this is about driving bills down beyond just low prices and being able to monitor your usage and control your energy around the home. And the third point is very much linked to the first one. It's about disruption. People talked about disruptive brands in this context, but they very much also talked about disruption to their home life. And again, people live these really full lives. They haven't got much time to think about their boiler, their electricity, their gas. That's something that needs to happen in the background. And waking up in the morning, not having any hot water, in the winter, your boiler not functioning, your central heating not functioning, just causes disruption to their lives. Our own internal feedback, so the voice of the customer data we used to understand the how. So how do we perform in this context? And I think the biggest learning for us was around our engineers. Our engineers are a huge asset to us as a company. They are the face of the organization. They are out in the streets in their vans. People recognize them. And interactions with our engineers tend to have the highest customer ratings of all the interactions you can have. If this is an on-demand repair, or if it's your annual service visits, customers just love interacting with our engineers. But what we found was that there is a disconnect between the goodwill that's being displayed towards the engineers and the brand. It doesn't necessarily reflect back onto the brand. And for those of you living in the UK, you might have seen our Here to Solve campaign that we launched back in February. And this is actually starting to address this issue. So we've retired Wilbur the Penguin, which was our creative vehicle for several years. And we've put engineers back at the front and center of our services offering. The second element that people talk about a lot is loyalty, and energy companies, services companies, not necessarily rewarding customers for their long-standing loyalty over many years. We've started again to address this. About 2 years ago, we launched our rewards program, which offers customers free energy days, discounts on other products, 2-for-1 tickets at theme parks, and sort of free tickets to special events at the O2. But clearly, there is still a lot of work to be done, and people talk about it in a positive and negative context. Some people feel rewarded through the program. Others just say, well, actually, you do nothing for me, having been with you for a long time. And the third one is about lifestyle, and that comes back to the points we saw in the social data. This is about living these busy lives, not really being able to, or not really wanting to engage with any disruption. If something goes wrong, I need somebody to come and fix this very quickly for me. And the common denominator between both of these data sets was actually home fixes. And the idea that if something breaks down, there is somebody there that comes very quickly and sorts it out, and my life just continues on a smooth path. Green energy, again, it's not so much at the moment about saving the planet. It's much more about being efficient in your consumption and being able to monitor this, and being able to drive your consumption down as a household, and in turn reduce your carbon footprint, of course. And then it won't come as a big surprise to many people on this. It's about customer service, and customer service is the make or break of all of this. If you don't deliver to customer expectations, none of this actually matters. So we know, and we've seen in other studies, that customer service is the most efficient way of going about driving brand equity. Back to you, Alex.
So before I get into the second model, I kind of wanted to take a bit of time to build some intuition for everyone about the kind of linchpin of this model, which uses a sort of method from engineering, actually, called independent component analysis. And the best way to think of this, or the traditional way, is they call it the cocktail party problem. And now you have to imagine you're a spy in the 80s, and you're at a party, a noisy, busy party. There are lots of conversations going on, and you want to zone in and listen to these conversations. And now you've planted microphones around the room, and each of these microphones hears just the hubbub of a party, but each microphone will hear something slightly different depending on where they are in the room, whether they're closer to or further away from the individual groups of people. And the problem is then, can you take just these microphone recordings and reconstruct the original conversations and then listen into them? And you do that using a method called ICA, or independent component analysis. And kind of to add a second metaphor that I think takes us closer to what we did, I then have what I call the wine party problem. problem. And I want you to imagine you have a fine wine called brand consideration in this case, say, and this is your sort of target conversation you're trying to recreate. And rather than microphone recordings, you have a series of other wines, and you have a very sensitive palate, and you could blend together these other wines to recreate the flavor profile of this brand consideration wine. But that doesn't tell you anything informative, really. So what you could do is look at the underlying sources or underlying factors common to these wines, things like body, tannins, sort of oaky profile, sweetness, dryness. And if you can understand these common factors, it's much easier and much more informative then to recreate your brand consideration wine. And so with that in mind, I'll take you through quickly the process that we used. So we start off from our unstructured data, our unstructured text, about 1 million records in total. And we apply the taxonomy and code frame to these individual verbatims. And we've then we're at the same stage that we got to in the category landscape then. But then we kind of deviate and we turn each of the individual lenses or parts of the taxonomy into its own time series, its own signal, keeping the different data sources, so the VOC, the social, the total social, separate. At this stage, we end up with about 160 different time series or different wines, as it were. And we want to now use this sort of ICA methodology to discover underlying factors, underlying drivers common to these. And I suppose the difficulty here is you don't know how many factors you're looking for or what those factors are actually going to be. It'll tell you, okay, there's a factor, it looks like this. It won't tell you what's within it. So at this stage, this is where you need the humans to step in and you need to identify these factors, because these are the common parts that are driving, individual factors are driving many emotions and they're driving much of the volume of conversation we're seeing. Some of them are very obvious because they have yearly variations, so they're obviously seasonal effects. Others are much more temporary and transient, so we had to really dig down into the lenses that were driving them and the verbatims to understand what they were. But once we'd reduced the data down to these, then you can create a model onto your KPI. And in our case, we'd use the dynamic linear regression. This would then let us kind of quantify each of the importance of each of these drivers. And I kind of imagine here at the top of the pyramid, as it were, from there, you can then kind of go down and you can say, okay, well, for this driver, what makes up this driver? And you can go down even further and you can say, okay, well, that lens is important. What's the verbatims under this lens? And that's where the real deep understanding comes from. So just quickly, this is sort of the view from the top, as it were, for the British Gas project looking at brand consideration. And you can see here the 7 factors that we identified that were kind of key events, sort of global, countrywide ongoings that were driving changes we were observing in the sentiment around, well, changes in the sentiment, I suppose, changes in the emotions, and changes in the volumes of conversations we were seeing. And here, really, 2 of them stand out as very important: the affordability and the seasonal readiness. And I'll hand over to Mario now to sort of talk in a bit more detail about each of these drivers.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. So seasonal readiness for us is about being able to meet the fluctuating demand throughout the year. So we see a lot of demand throughout the winter months when people obviously use their central heating system, boilers break down, and where we have huge amounts of demand there just through repairs. But we also see a lot of people then taking up our home services contract, so our annual service visits, then which follows 12 months after you initially engage with us, also falls into the winter. So we see a peak in demand in the winter months, that's not replicated at all in the rest of the year. So how we react to this, we found, is usually important for our brand equity. It can single-handedly, not meeting this demand, can single-handedly destroy all the brand equity we build up throughout the year, or you can elevate it to the same amount. Affordability isn't just about low prices, as we found out. It's also about transparency of pricing, so avoiding bill shocks for people, communicating with people properly so they understand what to expect, and giving them the right tools to budget by themselves. Professional contact was something, again, that we'd already seen in a way through our customer satisfaction surveys. This is about the type of engineer we send out to customers. In the winter months, I already mentioned, we have high levels of demand, so we tend to use contractors through our on-demand platform, Local Heroes. And customers are quite happy for these third-party engineers to turn up if there's a breakdown, because it enables us to get to you on the same day or within 24 hours of you notifying us. But they're not so happy for these third-party people to do the annual service visit, because this is where people really want to engage with us as a brand. So understanding this has enabled us to distribute demand according to what drives the highest emotional engagement with our customers. And the fourth point is very important to us. It's about digital engagement. And this is about people being able to interact with us when they want, when they choose, not at the time when the call center is open, but 24/7, any time of the day. And this work really has enabled us to turbocharge our customer obsession by instigating the right level of conversations between different departments of British Gas. So no longer do customer experience think they work in an isolated bubble, but they will involve the brand and the market team at the beginning of any project. We now have set up, so we call them frontrunner teams, but they're multidisciplinary teams where all these different departments now get a voice before large scale changes are being made to the customer experience. And obviously COVID-19, with all its implications for all of us, have just highlighted the need really for to really focus on those activities that generate the greatest ROI from us. So being able to identify those really emotionally charged territories and act on these findings has really helped us to go into this situation with our eyes wide open. And lastly, I just wanted to say that it is really going beyond the numbers and focusing on the language and the emotion that's being displayed in the language that has helped us to have the right strategy conversations and to stimulate the right strategy for us and our customer experience as a consequence. And I think we've got